All right, today we're going way back to the very beginning of artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about the story of the first ever neural network, the perceptron. It's basically the tale of a single, simple, thinking cell that kicked off this whole revolution. So, let's get into it.
Yeah, because this isn't just some dusty history lesson. This is the story of a truly brilliant idea, a machine that could actually learn from its own mistakes. But it's also a story about a killer flaw, a failure so big it nearly wiped out the entire field of AI. And yet, here's the twist. That very failure is what ended up paving the way for the AI world we're all living in right now.
To really get what's going on, we have to pull back and ask a really basic question. I mean, what does it actually mean for a machine to learn? Forget about all the complex stuff we have today. The original pioneers were starting from zero. How do you actually get a chunk of code and wires to see a pattern, make a call, and then, get better at it next time?
Well, that exact question is what led to the very first learning machine. But of course, it didn't just pop out of thin air. It was really built on the work of some true giants in the field.
So the whole thing really gets started back in the 40s. First, you have McCulloch and Pitts, who come up with this wild idea that you could model a brain cell as a simple logic gate, basically a little computer. Then, a few years later, Donald Hebb figures out a rule for how these brain cells might learn to connect to each other on their own. And all of that led up to 1958, when this psychologist, Frank Rosenblatt, puts it all together and proposes the perceptron. This was the first model that could learn from a teacher, what we now call supervised learning.
So, what even is this thing? Let's meet the perceptron. And honestly, the best way to picture it is just as a single artificial brain cell. Or think of it like a bouncer at a club, a gatekeeper making a really, really simple decision.
Officially, it's the simplest neural network you can possibly have. Its entire job is to classify stuff, to sort things into one of two piles. But, and this is the really critical part we're going to keep coming back to, it only works if those piles are linearly separable. Now, what does that mean? In plain English, it just means you have to be able to draw one single straight line to divide the two groups.
Okay, so here's how it works. First, it just takes in a bunch of information, or inputs. Let's say you're trying to teach it to recognize an apple. The inputs might be things like, is it round? Is it red? How big is it? The perceptron just gobbles up all these raw data points.
Now here's the secret sauce. The perceptron then decides how important each of those inputs is. For telling an apple from a banana, the color is probably way more important than the size, right? So it assigns a weight to each input. It's just a number that tells it how much to care about that piece of info. And these weights are adjustable. This is the part that actually learns.
And finally, it just adds up all those weighted inputs to get one final score. It's kind of like taking a vote. If the score is high enough, if it passes a certain bar, it fires out a yes. If not, it fires out a no. That's it. It's making a super simple binary decision. It's literally just drawing a line in the sand and deciding what side of the line you're on.
Okay, but how does it know where to draw that line? How does it figure out how to set those weights in the first place? Well, this is where the magic happens. It actually learns from its own mistakes.
The learning process is so simple, it's beautiful. The perceptron sees an example, say a picture of an apple, and it makes a guess. Then its teacher comes along and says, nope, you got that one wrong. So the perceptron makes a tiny little adjustment to its weights. It just nudges them in a direction that would have made its guess a little bit better. And it does this again and again and again, getting a little bit smarter with every single mistake.
And here is the absolutely amazing part. There's a mathematical proof, the perceptron convergence theorem, that says this simple process is guaranteed to work. It will eventually find the perfect solution. But there's always a catch, right? It only works if that one critical condition is met. The data has to be linearly separable.
So what happens when it isn't? What happens when this simple little machine comes up against a problem that you can't solve with a single straight line? Well, this brings us to the line it just can't cross.
To really see this in action, let's check out this classic double moon experiment from the source material. The goal is super simple. Teach the perceptron to draw one straight line that separates the blue moons from the red moons. Easy enough, right?
So in this first setup, you can see the two groups of moons are clearly separated. This is a linearly separable problem. And boom, the perceptron totally nails it. If you look at that graph on the right, the error rate just plummets to 0 in like 3 tries. It finds the perfect line, it's fast, it's efficient, it works.
But now, watch what happens when we just slide those moons together so they overlap.
Suddenly, the problem is not linearly separable anymore, and the algorithm completely falls apart. That crazy, jagged learning curve on the right shows you what's happening. The error rate is jumping all over the place. It never finds a solution. The perceptron is just stuck in this endless loop, frantically moving its line back and forth, trying to solve a puzzle that has no answer.
So here it is, the key takeaway. Linearly separable data means you can draw one clean, straight line to divide your two groups. But a ton of real-world problems, like our overlapping moons, are way messier than that. They're intertwined. You can't just slice them apart with a single line. This was the perceptron's Achilles heel. And funnily enough, figuring out how to get past this exact problem is what led to the deep learning models we have today, because they can draw all sorts of complicated curvy lines to solve these problems.
Now, this limitation didn't just stay in a lab notebook somewhere. It ended up having a massive, controversial, and, well, pretty destructive impact on the entire field of AI. See, in 1969, two of the heaviest hitters in AI research, Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert, published a famous book called Perceptrons, and in it, they mathematically proved this very limitation. But they didn't stop there. They went a step further and made this absolutely devastating claim: that trying to solve this by stacking perceptrons into multiple layers, well, they said it would be sterile, a total dead end. And because Minsky and Papert were so respected, that one critique just froze neural network research for more than a decade. It kicked off what people call the first AI winter. But here's the beautiful irony, right? By so brilliantly and, frankly, brutally defining what a single neuron couldn't do, they accidentally handed the next generation of researchers a perfect roadmap. The mission was clear: figure out how to beat the single-layer problem. And that challenge is what led directly to multi-layer perceptrons, which are the direct ancestors of the deep learning models that power, well, everything today. The failure wasn't the end of the road, it was a giant signpost pointing to the next breakthrough.
So think about that. The limitations of this one simple single-cell model literally set the entire research agenda for AI for almost 30 years. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the limits we're hitting in AI right now? The things our most advanced models just can't seem to do, that are quietly defining the great research problems for the next 30 years.